They say you can't truly know a person just by looking at them. But what if one look was all it took for someone to decide you don't belong? Picture this a quiet airport morning. You're holding a first-class ticket, just like everyone else in line. Suddenly, a stranger grabs your arm and snarls. Move. This line isn't for people like you. The crowd freezes. Phones rise. And in that split second, the world watches waiting to see what you'll do. Would you shout? Would you walk away? Or would you stand tall, calm, and let the truth unfold by itself? That's exactly what happened at Gate 19, when a white woman's arrogance collided with a black man's quiet strength. She thought she saw someone beneath her. She didn't realize he was the CEO, the man who owned the airline she was flying. This story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity, restraint, and what real power looks like when it refuses to scream. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what happened next will make you rethink how justice should sound. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let's begin this journey together. It was 6:45 a.m. Inside Terminal 4 of JFK Airport, just another gray New York morning, where the smell of burnt espresso and jet fuel mingled in the air like nervous anticipation. The intercom crackled above the crowd. Flight 721 to Seattle, boarding in 20 minutes. People shuffled in line, eyes on their phones, half awake and half irritated. At Gate 19, a man stood quietly near the velvet rope dividing the first-class boarding zone from the rest. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, dressed simply in dark jeans, a plain black tee, and an old leather duffel hanging from his shoulder. His name was Elijah Brooks, though no one at that gate knew it yet. To them, he was just another traveler who didn't look like he belonged there. He adjusted his boarding pass between his fingers, checking the small print again. Seat 1A. A good seat for a long flight. He sipped his coffee, calm, unhurried. The kind of calm that came from years of learning when silence spoke louder than words. And then a voice sliced through the morning hum. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing in this line?" The woman's tone turned heads. She was polished in every possible way. Madeline Carter, early 40s, pearls gleaming against a tailored white blazer. The kind of confidence that smelled faintly of entitlement. Her rolling suitcase had a gold monogram MC. Elijah blinked, unsure if she was talking to him, but the glare left no doubt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This line is for first class," she snapped. "You can't just stand here." Her words carried the practiced rhythm of someone used to being obeyed. The gate area fell slightly quieter. A businessman paused mid-scroll. A teenager pulled out her phone, pretending to text, but already recording. Elijah lowered his coffee cup. "I believe I'm in the right line." "Ma'am." "Right line," she repeated, laughing sharp as glass. "Honey, I've flown this route every week for 10 years. I know every frequent flyer in this terminal, and I've never seen you once." He said nothing, only shifted his duffel from one hand to the other. Then, without warning, she reached out and snatched the boarding pass from his hand. The motion was quick, almost violent. The paper tore slightly. Hot coffee splashed across his wrist, down his jeans, pooling on the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did she just get your coffee off my shoes?" She barked, stepping back as if she'd been the victim. Elijah crouched, picking up the soggy ticket. His fingers brushed against the ground near her high-heeled shoe. For a moment, the world shrank to that tiny space between humility and humiliation. He stood up slowly, meeting her eyes. "Ma'am, please don't touch my belongings." "Your belongings?" she said, incredulous. "You think you can waltz into first class dressed like that? This isn't a charity flight." Her voice climbed. The gate agents looked up. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Most pretended to be invisible. Elijah took a breath so deep it almost trembled. He felt the old familiar sting, the one that whispered, "Don't react. Don't give them the anger they expect." He straightened his ticket, though it was still damp. "It says, Seat 1A, he said softly. "Let me guess," she sneered. "Won a raffle. Found it in the trash." Her words struck like small, well-aimed stones. Every syllable built a wall between them. The loudspeaker interrupted again. "First-class boarding will begin in 10 minutes. But nobody moved. It was as if the entire terminal had frozen around Gate 19. A gate agent named Lauren Price approached, her smile tight with professional restraint. "Is everything all right here?" she asked. But her eyes landed on Elijah first, not on the woman who had raised her voice. Madeline jumped at the chance. "Yes. There's a problem. This man's trying to board first class with a fake ticket. Look at him." Lauren hesitated, then turned to Elijah. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass? Please." Elijah handed over the torn paper. Lauren examined it carefully, holding it up to the light, checking the barcode twice. Her hesitation felt heavier than the ticket itself. "It appears valid," she said slowly, "but I'll need to verify your ID." "Of course you do," Madeline said, rolling her eyes. "Check his welfare card while you're at it." The words landed like acid. A few people in the crowd flinched but said nothing. The sound of typing on phones filled the silence comments, hashtags forming in real time. Elijah reached into his wallet, pulling out his driver's license. He moved deliberately, every gesture measured. He handed it to Lauren without looking at Madeline again. Lauren compared the names. "Mr. Elijah Brooks," she read quietly. "Seat 1A, Flight 721 to Seattle." Madeline folded her arms. "So probably bought it secondhand. I'm telling you, people like this always find loopholes. People like this." The phrase echoed inside Elijah's head, the way thunder rolls after lightning. He remembered his father, once a mechanic who'd been escorted off a plane in the 80s for looking suspicious. He remembered promising himself that when he grew up, he'd never let anger own him the way injustice tried to. He swallowed. Calm. "Ma'am, I just want to get on my flight. Then get out of the way before I call security." Madeline spat. The gate crowd shifted. Tension spread like static. A few phones were now clearly filming. One screen, held by a young woman with a nose ring, reflected his face back at him, composed, restrained, but tired. The intercom chimed again. "Attention passengers. Flight 721 to Seattle will begin boarding shortly." The announcement barely broke the tension. Madeline turned toward Lauren. "Are you going to do something or not?" Lauren exhaled. "Security will be here shortly." "Ma'am, let's keep things calm." "Calm." Madeline scoffed. "He's in the wrong line. Look around you." And she gestured broadly at the mostly white, mostly well-dressed first-class passengers standing nearby. The unspoken comparison hung in the air. Every eye that avoided his made the silence louder. Elijah's coffee had cooled to a sticky puddle on the floor. He glanced down, then back up, meeting Lauren's uneasy stare. "I can wait," he said simply. "My group will be called soon." There was no sarcasm, no bitterness, only a quiet dignity that somehow made everyone else look small. Madeline laughed again, but the sound wavered this time. She could feel the phones aimed at her. Still, she doubled down. "You see that attitude? They always act like they're the victim. This is exactly what's wrong with ma'am." Lauren interrupted sharply. "That's enough." But the damage was done. Elijah's humiliation had already become public property, recorded, streamed, dissected in whispers. He looked out the large glass window toward the tarmac, where his plane sat waiting in the early light. He thought of the boardroom awaiting him in Seattle, of the quarterly review he was supposed to lead. And he thought of how, even now, even at this stage of his life, he still had to prove that he belonged. Inside, a quiet battle raged. Part of him wanted to walk away to avoid the ugliness. Another part whispered, "If I walk away, it keeps happening." He took a slow breath. A security officer appeared at the edge of the gate. Madeline's voice grew shrill again, triumphant. "Over here, this man's trying to cause trouble." The officer nodded to Lauren, approaching Elijah instead. "Sir, can I talk to you for a second?" Elijah looked at the uniform, then at the cameras, then at the crowd. He nodded once. "Yes, officer. You can talk to me right here." That answer surprised everyone. Madeline blinked. The officer paused. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was electric. Somewhere behind the phones, someone whispered, "Why's he so calm?" Because calm, Elijah thought, was the only armor he had left. The intercom buzzed one more time. "First-class passengers for Flight 721, please prepare to board." The crowd held its breath. Madeline smirked. Certain victory was hers. Elijah simply wiped his hand on a napkin, straightened his ticket, and waited. He wasn't the storm. He was the eye of it. And the storm had only just begun. The moment the officer stepped forward, Gate 19 turned into a stage, and every passenger became part of the show. Phones tilted higher. Screens glowed brighter. The air buzzed with the quiet thrill of witnessing a confrontation that didn't belong to them, but that no one could look away from. Elijah stood perfectly still. His jaw tightened just enough to betray that he was tired of moments like this. Tired of proving that calm wasn't guilt. Tired of having to earn space in rooms he'd already built. "Sir," the officer said, voice neutral, "we just need to clear this area for boarding. Could you please step aside for a moment?" Elijah's eyes met his. "Officer, I'll stay right here. My group is boarding in 5 minutes." The firmness in his tone wasn't defiance, it was certainty. Something in the officer's stance faltered. A few passengers glanced at each other, confused, as if the script they'd expected had suddenly changed. Madeline crossed her arms, lips curling. "He's refusing to cooperate," she said loudly. Typical. The officer ignored her but kept his posture guarded. "Sir, we can make this easy. Just step over to the side." Elijah breathed slowly, like someone counting heartbeats. Easy for who he asked quietly. That question lingered in the air. The officer hesitated. Lauren, the gate agent, fidgeted behind her counter. Madeline looked around, seeking agreement from the silent crowd, but their faces no longer mirrored her certainty. Across the aisle, a teenage girl whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "He's not doing anything," she said to her live stream. "He's just standing there." Her name was Nia Torres, 19 years old, sophomore in journalism, traveling home to visit her parents. She hadn't planned to become a witness to history that morning. Her phone shook in her hand as the comment feed exploded across the screen. "Where is this? That woman's insane. Don't stop recording." The more she filmed, the more she realized her generation had been built for moments like this, not because they wanted them, but because the world still demanded proof. Madeline turned sharply toward her. "Excuse me, are you filming me?" Nia didn't look up. "I'm filming the truth," she said quietly. Elijah caught her eye for half a second, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. He didn't know this girl, but her small act of courage steadied something inside him. The officer sighed, speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit B-47. I've got a dispute at Gate 19 first-class line. Need confirmation on passenger verification." Lauren tried to regain control. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said, voice trembling. "We'll get this sorted out." Madeline wasn't done. "I can't believe this," she said, pacing. "They're just letting him stand there like he owns the place." Elijah tilted his head slightly, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. "I don't own the place," he said. "Not yet." It wasn't meant as a joke, but a few people near the back chuckled nervously. Even humor, when born of composure, can disarm a mob. Lauren held up his torn ticket again, reading it like she was deciphering a code. "Seat 1A, first class, flight 721, she murmured, as if saying it aloud might make it less real. She turned to Madeline. "Ma'am, his ticket appears to be in order." Madeline blinked, caught off guard. "What, you can't be serious?" "It's valid," Lauren repeated. Madeline's voice sharpened, slicing the air. "Then his ID must be fake. You think someone dressed like that could afford a first-class ticket? Use your common sense." The crowd's murmurs swelled again. Some people nodded, others frowned. A middle-aged man muttered, "She's got a point." Another whispered, "I don't know. He seems calm." Elijah could feel the weight of their judgment pressing against his chest. He'd spent decades crafting the kind of composure that white rooms demanded from black men: quiet, intelligent, non-threatening, perfectly reasonable. But today, that composure felt like a cage. Inside, something twisted. A voice his father's echoed faintly in memory. "You can't change a mind that's afraid of being wrong, son, but you can show them what right looks like." He swallowed hard and met Madeline's stare. "Ma'am," he said softly, "your assumptions aren't my responsibility." That line, delivered without a hint of anger, carried more power than a shout ever could. A few passengers lowered their phones, suddenly aware of the gravity of what they were witnessing. Madeline's cheeks flushed red. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I know exactly what you're trying to do, play the victim. Make me look bad." Elijah didn't move. "You're doing that on your own." The gate went dead silent. Even the officer stopped breathing for a second. Lauren fumbled with her earpiece. I just got confirmation," she said nervously. "The ticket is fully valid. Mr. Brooks is cleared for boarding." But Madeline couldn't stop herself. "You see, this is the problem. They always get away with it. He probably scammed the system somehow." Lauren's patience snapped. "Ma'am, that's enough." Her raised voice startled the crowd. Madeline turned, mouth open, but no sound came. Elijah looked down at his coffee-stained jeans, the dark patch drying in uneven shapes. He could almost laugh at the absurdity. All this, over a seat. He thought about the thousands of employees waiting for his leadership call that morning. He thought about his daughter, Ava, who loved airplanes but once asked him, "Daddy, why don't they let people like us fly them?" And here he was still explaining to the world that people like him could do more than just fly them. They could build them, own them, command them. The loudspeaker broke the silence again. "Boarding Group 1. Please prepare for check-in." Lauren gestured toward the gate. "Mr. Brooks, you're welcome to board now." Elijah nodded, but didn't move. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "I'll wait." Madeline barked a laugh. "Of course you will, because you know you're bluffing." He met her gaze steady, unflinching. "Because I'm patient," he said. "And I believe the truth doesn't need to rush." The line of passengers behind them shifted awkwardly. Some looked down, others looked away. A mother pulled her son closer, whispering, "Don't ever treat people like that." Okay, in the corner, Nia's live stream reached 3,000 viewers. Comments poured in. "Who is this guy? He's handling this like a king. That woman's done for." Madeline, still unaware of her digital downfall, stood trembling with anger. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "The things we have to deal with these days." Elijah exhaled slowly. He could feel the entire gate watching him, waiting to see how far a man's dignity could stretch before it broke. The officer's radio buzzed again. "Unit B-47 stand down. Passenger verified. All clear." The officer nodded stiffly, stepping back. "You're good to go, sir." Madeline blinked, stunned. "That's it. You're just going to let him?" "Yes, ma'am," the officer said flatly. "He's cleared." She laughed again, high and brittle. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to report all of you. You'll see." No one answered. The silence was thick enough to touch. Elijah finally spoke, his tone calm, almost gentle. "Ma'am, I truly hope you have a pleasant flight." Madeline froze, unsure how to respond to kindness that felt like judgment. He turned to Lauren. "Thank you," he said simply. "I appreciate your help." Lauren nodded, ashamed. "I'm sorry for the confusion, Mr. Brooks." "No need to be sorry," he replied. "Just be better next time." And with that, he stepped forward to the gate scanner. The red light blinked green. But before he could walk through, Madeline's voice rang out again, sharp, desperate, trembling with something deeper than anger. "You don't belong here!" The words echoed across the terminal, hollow and ancient, the echo of centuries compressed into one sentence. Elijah stopped, not turning around. He could have said 100 things. He said only one. "We'll see." And then he boarded the jet bridge, leaving the gate in stunned silence. Behind him, the whispers began the kind that grow legs and find their way onto every feed within minutes. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. "You're Gate 19. Dignity first." Elijah Brooks. For now, though, Elijah didn't know any of that. He just walked down the narrow passageway, each step echoing softly, steady as his heartbeat. In his mind, one question circled like a storm cloud. How many times do we have to stay silent before silence becomes its own kind of scream? He didn't have the answer, but he knew this by the time the plane touched down in Seattle. The world would know his name. The hum of the airplane engines outside mixed with the nervous chatter inside the terminal. People whispered in low voices, replaying the scene they had just witnessed. The storm at Gate 19 wasn't over, it was only shifting shape. The argument had moved from words in the air to screens in their hands. Nia Torres sat cross-legged on the carpet near a wall outlet, her phone still recording. Her live stream had been running for nearly 15 minutes now. What had started as a random morning vlog had turned into a real-time documentary of prejudice unfolding in an airport. The number in the corner of her screen blinked and jumped 3,000 viewers, 5,000, then 7. Comments scrolled faster than she could read them. Is this real? Someone call the news? Who is that man? He's so calm. She's out of control. Keep filming. Nia's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Her voice, however, shook. This woman just tried to kick a man out of line because he's black. He didn't do anything, just stood there. And now security's treating him like the problem. Across the gate, Madeline Carter was pacing near the counter, still fuming. Her pearl earrings glinted under the fluorescent light. She muttered to Lauren Price, the gate agent, "You saw how he looked at me. There's something off about him." Lauren didn't answer. She was typing something into her terminal, pretending to be busy. But her stomach twisted with shame. For years, she had told herself she was fair, that she treated everyone equally. Yet she'd looked at Elijah and doubted him before he even spoke. She couldn't stop replaying that moment. Madeline, meanwhile, was unraveling. The composure she prided herself on was cracking like thin glass. She scanned the terminal, realizing people weren't on her side anymore. Phones were aimed at her, faces judgmental and silent. Her voice faltered. "Why is everyone staring?" she demanded. "Because," Nia thought, "they're finally seeing you. Near the window." The security officer, Unit B-47, spoke quietly into his radio again, trying to de-escalate the chaos. But his words were drowned out by a rising wave of whispers, camera shutters, and the unmistakable sound of justice gathering momentum. At the center of it all, Elijah Brooks stood near the boarding line. He had not moved an inch since the confrontation began. His ticket was still damp. Edges curled where coffee had dried. His calmness wasn't submission. It was control. Every breath was deliberate. Every silence intentional. The crowd didn't realize they were watching a masterclass in dignity. A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Mom, why's that lady yelling at him?" The woman bent down and whispered, "Because she doesn't understand kindness." Elijah overheard. His lips tightened into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. The intercom crackled overhead. "Attention passengers boarding for Flight 721 has been temporarily delayed. We appreciate your patience." The announcement only deepened the tension. People murmured, irritated but curious. The delay had turned them into spectators of an uncomfortable play, one that none of them could stop watching. Madeline's voice rose again, desperate to reclaim authority. "I just want to get on the plane. Why are we all waiting because of him?" No one answered. The silence itself was a verdict. Nia zoomed in slightly, capturing Elijah's face. The light from the window framed him like a portrait, steady eyes, expression thoughtful but weary. In her mind, she narrated quietly for her viewers. "He's not angry. He's tired. You can see it in his face. That's what makes this worse." Her phone buzzed. Notifications poured in. A local journalist had messaged her. "Can we use your footage?" She hesitated, then typed back one word. "Yes." Somewhere deep in the airport, servers processed that file. Within minutes, clips began circulating across social platforms. Hashtags multiplied. The crowd didn't know it yet, but by the time the plane left the ground, half of America would know about Gate 19. Lauren walked over to Elijah, her voice low. "Mr. Brooks, I'm truly sorry about what happened earlier. You have every right to be here." He nodded, but there was no relief in his eyes. "Apologies are easy," he said. "Understanding is harder." "I know," she whispered. "I'll do better." He looked at her then, really looked, and said gently, "Then start now." She followed his gaze toward Madeline. The woman was still muttering about lawsuits, her words incoherent, fueled by humiliation and denial. Lauren's throat tightened. She had the sudden urge to say something, but fear held her back. What if she lost her job? What if she made it worse? Elijah saw her hesitation. "Courage," he said quietly, "isn't loud. It's doing the right thing before it's popular." Lauren swallowed hard and turned to Madeline. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "you owe this man an apology." Madeline froze. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Lauren said, voice trembling but steady. "You assaulted him. You insulted him. You owe him an apology." The terminal fell into absolute silence. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Even the distant sound of baggage carts disappeared. All that remained was the sharp inhale of a crowd holding its breath. Madeline's face went crimson. "You're out of line," she hissed. "Do you know who I am?" Lauren's eyes didn't waver. "No," she said. "And I think that's the point." A wave of low murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Finally." Another muttered, "Good for her." Nia's phone was vibrating nonstop now, 10,000 viewers and climbing. Her chat feed was a blur of disbelief and praise. She stood up for him. "This is history right here. I can't stop crying." Madeline turned toward Elijah, her voice cracking. "This is ridiculous. I'm not apologizing to someone who doesn't even," but she couldn't finish. Because Elijah was looking at her with something she didn't expect. Not anger, not triumph. Pity. "You don't have to apologize to me," he said softly. "You just have to learn what you've forgotten." She blinked. "And what's that?" "That decency doesn't check your outfit before it shows up." Her jaw clenched. "You think you're better than me?" He shook his head. "No. I think I've just been where you've never had to stand. That single line broke through the air like light cracking through glass. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The crowd felt it, an invisible shift, like everyone had just learned something they couldn't unlearn. Lauren stepped back, exhaling. The officer at the edge of the scene lowered his radio. Even he couldn't pretend anymore that this was just a misunderstanding. Nia ended her live stream, saving the video with trembling fingers. Her phone showed the number over 12,000 viewers. She whispered to herself, "The world's going to see this." Elijah glanced toward her, offering a small nod. She smiled faintly in return. "Thank you," he mouthed. He didn't know her name yet, but soon everyone would. The boarding announcement resumed, the intercom voice almost timid now. "We will begin boarding shortly for Flight 721 to Seattle. First-class passengers, please prepare to board." People shifted, gathering their bags, but no one dared move first. All eyes followed Elijah as he turned toward the gate. His composure was a quiet kind of rebellion. Every step he took was deliberate, a reminder that grace under pressure wasn't weakness. It was strength disguised as stillness. Madeline stood frozen by the counter, realizing too late that the story had slipped out of her control. The whispers had turned into recordings. The judgment she once wielded had turned inward, and for the first time in years, she felt small. Lauren spoke softly, almost to herself. "The world just changed a little, didn't it?" Elijah gave a faint smile. "It usually does when someone finally looks." The scanner beeped as he passed through. The crowd exhaled. Behind him, the sound of tapping keys echoed the sound of millions beginning to talk about what they'd seen. Far from Gate 19, a trending topic began to rise. The voice in the crowd. And for the first time that morning, the silence inside the terminal didn't feel heavy. It felt hopeful. The jet bridge had opened, but no one rushed forward. Passengers lingered near the gate, their conversations hushed, as if they were waiting for permission to breathe again. The tension that had filled the air only minutes before had turned into something heavier reflection. The story of what had happened was already escaping the walls of Gate 19, spreading like vapor through Wi-Fi and whispers. Elijah Brooks stood near the boarding scanner, not yet stepping through. He glanced back once, as if he wanted to make sure everyone had learned the lesson that silence alone couldn't teach. His eyes found Nia Torres sitting cross-legged again, her phone still glowing in her lap. She gave him a quiet nod. He returned it with the faintest smile before turning toward the gate agent. Lauren Price held the handheld scanner like it weighed 50 pounds. She had worked in airports for 6 years and had seen her share of rude passengers, late flights, and bureaucratic storms. But this was different. This was the first time she'd seen someone make her question herself without saying a cruel word. She felt a sting in her chest, the kind that comes when shame meets awakening. Before she could hand back Elijah's ticket, Madeline Carter moved closer again. Her voice was quieter now, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You're just going to let him go. After what he did." Lauren blinked. After what he did, Madeline straightened her blazer, clutching her handbag like armor. "You don't know people like that. They act calm, but it's a trick. He's playing all of you." The crowd shifted uneasily. People wanted to move on, to end the discomfort, but something in Madeline's persistence held them there. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was desperation. She could feel the crowd turning against her, but she couldn't stop herself. Pride had become her only shield. Elijah exhaled softly, then reached into his wallet. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, like he'd done this before defending himself without raising his voice. He pulled out a thin black rectangle that gleamed under the fluorescent light, a Centurion American Express card. Madeline's laughter cracked through the air, brittle and forced. "Oh, please, you can buy those online now." Elijah said nothing. He handed the card to Lauren, who looked down and froze. The name embossed in silver letters matched the one on his boarding pass, Elijah Brooks. And in small font beneath it, Brooks Aviation Group. Her eyes widened. "Sir, you're—" He stopped her with a small gesture. "It's just a card," he said quietly. "Plastic doesn't change people. It only reveals them." A little girl sitting with her mother nearby had been watching everything with wide eyes. Her name was Lily Moore, 9 years old, traveling to visit her grandparents. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, why is everyone being so mean to that man?" Her mother hesitated. "Sometimes, honey, people forget to see others as people." Lily frowned, confused. "But he didn't do anything wrong." "No, he didn't," her mother said softly. Elijah overheard. For a brief moment, his composure cracked just slightly, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. He looked at Lily, smiled gently, and bent down to pick up the torn piece of his boarding pass from the floor. The paper was crumpled, coffee-stained, and barely readable. He smoothed it between his fingers. "Even this," he said quietly, mostly to himself, "deserves a second chance." The child tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He smiled at her. "Sometimes, things that get torn apart can still take you where you need to go." Her mother's eyes glistened. Madeline heard the exchange but refused to understand it. "You're really milking this for attention, aren't you?" she snapped. "What are you, some kind of motivational speaker?" Elijah looked at her evenly. "No, ma'am. I'm just someone who's tired of pretending this is normal." Lauren's hands trembled as she handed back the boarding pass and the black card. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "your seat is ready." Madeline's laughter grew shriller. "Seat? You think he actually has a seat in first class?" She turned toward the passengers behind her, seeking allies. You've all been fooled, but nobody laughed. Nobody nodded. The crowd that had once been silent now stood firmly still, not in fear, but in quiet solidarity. Nia lifted her phone again, not to stream, but to capture a single photo, Elijah holding the torn ticket in one hand, the black card in the other. The light from the terminal window framed him in gold. She typed a caption, "Dignity is power, you can't swipe away." The post went live. Within minutes, thousands shared it. Within hours, millions would see it. But in that moment, Elijah didn't know any of that. He was focused on one thing, the small, trembling voice of a little girl who had asked the simplest question in the room. He turned toward Lily and said gently, "Thank you for seeing me." Her mother smiled faintly. "She has good eyes." He nodded. "The best kind ones." Madeline groaned, grabbing her bag. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like this man's a saint. He's just another—" She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but the silence she left behind said it for her. Elijah's expression softened, not in pity, but in something deeper understanding. "You don't have to like me," he said, "but someday you'll wish you'd listened." Madeline turned away, muttering under her breath, but her defiance had thinned into embarrassment. Lauren cleared her throat, signaling the boarding process again. "First-class passengers, please proceed." Elijah stepped forward, but before he passed through, he looked back at Lauren. "You did the right thing," he said. "Not everyone would have—" Lauren shook her head. "I should have done it sooner." He smiled faintly. Better late than never. The scanner beeped as it read his ticket, its small green light flashing approval. The sound echoed across the gate, soft yet monumental, a single tone announcing more than just permission to board. It was the sound of vindication, quiet and undeniable. As Elijah disappeared down the jet bridge, Nia lowered her phone, heart racing. She looked at Lauren, who was visibly shaken. "You okay?" she asked. Lauren exhaled. "I don't know. I think I just saw the world shift a little." Nia smiled. "Then keep watching. It's not done shifting yet. Behind them." Madeline sat down heavily on a nearby bench. Her phone buzzed with messages, texts from friends, social notifications, an avalanche of digital attention she didn't want. She stared blankly at the screen as her own face began to appear in headlines. Woman accuses black passenger at JFK livestream goes viral. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Her voice, the weapon she'd always trusted, had lost its power. And in the quiet corner of the terminal, Lily turned to her mother again. "Mom, do you think he'll be okay?" Her mother smiled softly. "He already is. Sweetheart, he already is." The cabin of Flight 612 hummed with low conversation and the rustle of boarding passengers. Overhead, bins clicked shut. Flight attendants moved briskly through aisles, and soft jazz spilled from hidden speakers. Outside, the night sky over New York shimmered with streaks of departing planes. Inside, tension lingered, an invisible thread connecting everyone who had witnessed what happened at Gate 19. Elijah Brooks took his seat in 2A, next to the window. He didn't recline, didn't reach for champagne. He simply sat quietly, gazing at the reflection in the oval glass, the man the world had just seen, and the one he'd been forced to hide. He felt no triumph, only a quiet ache that came from knowing this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Across the aisle, a young flight attendant named Rachel Nguyen adjusted her uniform collar and approached him with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly. "Welcome aboard." He looked up, surprised she knew his name. She held a small tablet in her hand. "Captain Reynolds asked me to make sure you were comfortable. He wanted to apologize personally once we're in the air." Elijah nodded. "Please tell the captain I appreciate that, but there's no need. I'm just here to get home." Rachel hesitated, then added, "I saw part of what happened on social media. People are talking about you like—" She trailed off, unsure if it was appropriate to finish. He smiled faintly. "Like I'm a story, not a person." Her cheeks flushed. "Something like that. Then let's hope the story teaches more than it entertains," he said gently. She nodded and stepped away, glancing back once as though she knew she'd just witnessed something larger than the evening flight she'd been assigned to. Madeline Carter, 2 rows behind him, sat rigidly, arms crossed tight against her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused. She'd managed to board after all, though no one quite knew how she'd talked her way through the boarding gate. Passengers avoided her gaze. Even the man beside her, a quiet professor type, pretended to be deeply engrossed in his crossword. When the engines roared and the plane began its ascent, Madeline's phone vibrated endlessly in her purse. Notifications exploded across the screen calls, texts, news alerts. Her own name was now trending. She turned the phone face down on the tray table, unwilling to face the reflection of her own words spreading through the internet. At cruising altitude, the seatbelt signs dimmed. The city lights shrank to a faint constellation below. Rachel rolled the beverage cart down the aisle, smiling at passengers. But her eyes flicked often toward Elijah. She could feel the quiet gravity surrounding him, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and guilt from those who had witnessed the incident earlier. When she reached his row, he looked up from his phone. The news feed displayed headlines he hadn't asked for. Gate 19 incident sparks national conversation. CEO humiliated at JFK. Dignity first trends nationwide. He turned the screen off. "Water, please," he said simply. Rachel handed him a bottle, but her voice dropped. "If it means anything, I think you handled it better than anyone could have." Elijah smiled faintly. "Maybe. But grace shouldn't have to be a defense mechanism." From 2 rows back, Madeline's voice rose sharply. "Oh, give me a break." The cabin went silent. Even the engine hum seemed to dull. Elijah turned slightly but didn't respond. Madeline leaned forward, anger breaking through the thin shell of embarrassment. "You think you're a hero now, don't you? Sitting up here pretending you're above everyone else. He exhaled slowly. No, ma'am. I don't think that at all, she scoffed. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I didn't say a word. He interrupted softly. That's exactly it, she snapped. You made me look like a fool just by standing there, acting so calm. People like you. She stopped herself again, catching the eyes of a dozen passengers turned toward her. Elijah's voice was quiet, but it carried through the cabin. People like me. Her throat tightened. I didn't mean. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. You did. You just didn't expect to hear how it sounded outside your head. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One older man murmured, Maybe let it go. Lady. Madeline's cheeks flushed crimson. You think I'm the villain? Fine. But I was scared. You were existing, Elijah said. That's all I was doing. And that frightened you. She stared at him, words failing her for the first time since the ordeal began. Rachel stepped in carefully. Ma'am, can I get you something to drink? Madeline shook her head, then whispered, No, I'm fine. She turned toward the window, eyes glistening in the reflection of the moonlight. Elijah looked down at his hands. His composure hadn't faltered, but inside, something churned a blend of sorrow and exhaustion. He'd built an empire, led thousands of employees, and yet here he was, forced again to defend the right to simply sit in a seat he'd paid for. He closed his eyes for a moment. The hum of the engines became rhythmic, almost meditative. In his mind, he saw his father an aircraft mechanic who'd worked 3 jobs just to keep the family fed. Son, his father used to say, you don't fight ignorance with fists, you outfly it. He smiled faintly at the memory. When the pilot's voice came over the intercom, it startled everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. I'd like to extend a personal apology to one of our passengers tonight, Mr. Elijah Brooks. Every head turned. I wasn't at the gate earlier, the captain continued. But I've reviewed the report, Mr. Brooks, on behalf of the crew and this airline. We want to thank you for the dignity you showed. You reminded us all what professionalism looks like under pressure. The cabin filled with quiet applause. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Even Rachel clapped softly. Madeline's hands stayed still. Elijah raised a hand in acknowledgement, but said nothing. His face remained calm, though behind his eyes, emotion flickered relief mixed with the heavy weight of knowing that his composure had become a spectacle. After the announcement, Rachel leaned closer. He didn't have to do that. No, Elijah said quietly, but maybe someone watching will learn from it. From behind, Madeline whispered, barely audible, You really are who you say you are, aren't you? Elijah turned his head slightly. Who did you think I was? I don't know, she said. Someone pretending. It didn't make sense that a man like you. She trailed off again, unable to finish. He looked out the window, stars scattered like distant runways. That's the thing about sense, he said. It doesn't always belong to reason. Sometimes it belongs to bias. For a long moment, neither spoke. The plane cut through the darkness, quiet except for the sound of air rushing past the fuselage. Hours later, when the lights dimmed for overnight cruising, Rachel noticed something that made her pause. Madeline had turned toward the aisle, her hands trembling as she opened her phone again. On the screen was the viral photo Nia had posted earlier, Elijah with his torn ticket, the caption about dignity. Madeline stared at it for a long time, then quietly whispered, I'm sorry. Elijah, eyes closed, didn't respond, but the smallest nod, barely visible, told her he'd heard. Outside the window, dawn began to edge across the horizon, painting the sky with threads of gold and violet. It was the kind of sunrise that made people believe in second chances. When the plane landed at San Francisco International, applause erupted again, this time for the safe flight. But maybe also for something else, the collective exhale of a conscience that had been tested mid-air. As passengers stood to disembark, Rachel approached Elijah once more. "There are reporters waiting at the gate," she warned softly. "Looks like your story's bigger than the plane." He smiled gently. "Let's hope the story's about what happened, not who it happened to." She nodded. "Either way, people are listening now." Elijah gathered his briefcase and paused by Madeline's row. She looked up, her face weary, eyes red from sleeplessness. He said quietly, "You know, Ms. Carter, forgiveness isn't just something we give others. It's something we decide to let ourselves deserve." She swallowed hard. "Do you think that's possible after something like this?" He met her gaze. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Then he walked toward the front of the plane, his steps steady, the dawn light washing over him like a benediction. Outside, the terminal buzzed with cameras and microphones, the beginning of a storm he hadn't asked for. But Elijah Brooks wasn't afraid of storms. After all, he built planes that were made to fly through them. The automatic doors at Gate 72 hissed open, spilling passengers into the terminal. Flashbulbs greeted them like lightning bright, relentless, impossible to escape. Reporters shouted questions over one another, microphones thrust forward like weapons in a war for headlines. "Elijah, Mr. Brooks, how does it feel to be a viral icon? Were you discriminated against because of race? Is it true you own the airline? Are you pressing charges against the woman?" Each voice bled into the next until they became one long roar. Elijah adjusted the strap of his briefcase, his calm unbroken, but his pulse quickening. The last thing he wanted was to be a symbol. He'd built his life on quiet leadership, the kind that measured impact through policies and opportunity, not cameras and hashtags. Rachel Nguyen followed a few steps behind, shielding her eyes from the glare. "Mr. Brooks, I can help you get through the side exit," she said, her voice almost drowned by the noise. He nodded. "Thank you, but if I walk away now, they'll write their own version before I get a chance to speak." She hesitated. "Then at least let me stand beside you." He smiled faintly. "You already are." They stopped before a wall of cameras. Elijah's posture straightened, the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years in boardrooms filled with power and politics. He waited until the noise began to fade, then spoke not loudly, but clearly enough that every microphone caught his words. "Before you ask," he began, "yes, the incident at JFK happened. Yes, it was painful. But this story isn't just about me. It's about what we see when we look at someone and decide what they deserve." The crowd fell silent, sensing they weren't about to get the soundbite they came for. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's life," Elijah continued. "I'm here because something we all saw today reflects a deeper sickness, a reflex that makes people assume value based on appearance. I didn't come to embarrass anyone. I came to remind us that dignity isn't a privilege, it's a right." Reporters glanced at one another, unsure whether to clap or keep recording. One shouted, "Are you going to fire the gate staff involved?" Elijah paused. "I don't make decisions in anger. We'll review what happened. Accountability isn't revenge, it's repair." Another asked, "What about the woman who confronted you?" His eyes softened. "She made a mistake, a serious one. But if we destroy everyone who's ever acted out of ignorance, who will be left to learn?" The answer struck like a ripple through the crowd. Some lowered their cameras, others just stared. Elijah nodded to Rachel, signaling it was time to move. Security opened a path toward the VIP exit, where a black sedan waited. As they walked, Rachel whispered, "You could have said anything back there. You could have destroyed her." He sighed. And what would that change? People already love a villain. I'd rather they love the lesson. Outside, the California sun hit like a spotlight. He blinked against it, grateful for the warmth even as exhaustion set in. The driver, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, opened the door. "Welcome home, Mr. Brooks." But Elijah hesitated before getting in. His phone buzzed hundreds of messages from executives, journalists, and friends. He scrolled past them all until one name stopped him. Naya Torres. The video has hit 12 million views. People are calling for reform. Just thought you should know it's bigger than any of us now. He typed back, "Then let's make sure it stays bigger than me." He closed his phone and slid into the back seat. As the car pulled away, he caught a glimpse of Madeline Carter through the glass doors of the terminal. She stood alone, her designer jacket wrinkled, her phone pressed to her chest. For a moment, their eyes met two lives bound by a single mistake. Then the car turned the corner and she disappeared from view. At corporate headquarters later that afternoon, the mood was tense. The building Brooks Aviation's glass tower overlooking downtown San Francisco usually buzzed with quiet efficiency. Today, it felt like a hive rattled by a stone. Executives crowded the conference room, phones pinging with live updates, emails marked urgent. Elijah entered without ceremony. Conversation stopped instantly. The CEO everyone had seen on television was suddenly in the flesh, and silence replaced strategy. "All right," he said, setting his briefcase on the table. "Let's talk about what happens next." Chief Operating Officer Daniel Hayes leaned forward. "We've already issued a statement condemning the discrimination. Social media sentiment's 90% positive toward you, but the airline's PR team is panicking. They're begging for guidance." Elijah nodded. "We'll give them more than a statement. We'll give them a plan." He turned to Leah Kim, Head of Human Resources. "I want a complete audit of our customer service and bias training programs, not just for this airline, but across all subsidiaries. Start with hiring data, promotion statistics, and disciplinary records. If there's a pattern, we fix it before it becomes another headline." Leah scribbled notes furiously. "Understood." Daniel frowned. "Elijah, this could expose us to liability." He met Daniel's eyes evenly. "Transparency isn't liability. It's leadership." The room fell quiet again. Elijah's tone wasn't angry. It was resolute, calm, grounded in something deeper than damage control. He continued, "Next, we'll launch a fund. $10 million for bias prevention, de-escalation training, and public education. We'll name it after the gate where this happened. Gate 19. Let it remind people what happens when silence fails." A low murmur swept the room. It wasn't just corporate philanthropy. It was transformation. "Finally," he turned to his communications director. "Schedule a press conference tomorrow morning. But no stage lights, no podiums. We'll hold it outside the terminal where it began. I want real people there. Passengers, employees, the ones who saw it." Daniel leaned back, shaking his head. "You're turning this into a movement, aren't you?" Elijah smiled faintly. "I'm just making sure the next man doesn't have to carry this weight alone." Across town, Madeline Carter sat in a hotel room overlooking the bay. The curtains were half drawn, her phone buzzing nonstop with calls she couldn't bear to answer. Her name was everywhere now, articles, hashtags, even memes. The world had turned her worst moment into an endless replay. She pressed her palms against her face. The echo of Elijah's words, "You were scared because I existed," wouldn't leave her mind. She stood and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back looked older than she remembered. The confidence that once defined her had curdled into something brittle. For the first time, she didn't see authority in her reflection. She saw fear small, fragile, and unmasked. Her laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line made her hesitate before clicking message from Brooks Aviation Legal Department. Her heart pounded, but instead of the expected lawsuit or termination notice, the message contained only 2 sentences. We will be reviewing all employee conduct in this matter. Please prepare a statement for internal investigation. You will be given the opportunity to attend a bias training program before any final decision is made. And below it, a short note written by Elijah himself. Accountability begins with understanding. I hope you take this chance to learn. Tears welled in her eyes, anger, relief, shame, gratitude all tangled together. She whispered to the empty room, "Why would he give me that?" Because forgiveness, she realized, was its own kind of power, the kind she'd never understood. She turned to the window. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the sunset, painted in gold and crimson. For the first time all day, she let herself breathe. That night, Elijah stood alone on his apartment balcony overlooking the Pacific. The ocean stretched endlessly dark, waves rolling with the steady rhythm of time itself. The city's noise faded to a hum behind him. He thought of his father again, hands rough from decades of work, voice soft as worn leather. "Son," the old man had once said, "when life tries to push you out of line, stand taller, not to fight, to remind them you belong." Elijah smiled. "I stood." "Dad," he whispered. And they saw. The sound of the sea answered softly. He took a deep breath, then pulled out his phone one last time. On social media, the tag, "Your Dignity," first had reached 30 million mentions. But what mattered more were the stories beneath it. Teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, students all sharing moments when they'd been judged and how they'd chosen to respond. He scrolled through them slowly, heart heavy and full all at once. The storm that had started in one terminal was now reshaping an entire conversation. And for the first time that day, Elijah felt something like peace, not because justice had been served, but because humanity, against all odds, was learning. The next morning, the front entrance of Brooks Aviation headquarters looked like the steps of a courthouse. Journalists, employees, and onlookers filled the plaza. Camera lenses glittered beneath the California sun, capturing every movement, every flicker of emotion. The company's logo gleamed across the glass facade behind them, 2 silver wings stretching upward, reflecting the sky. At exactly 9 o'clock, Elijah Brooks walked out, not flanked by security or PR handlers, but alone. He wore no suit jacket, only a crisp white shirt with rolled sleeves and a quiet expression that made him seem both larger and gentler than the moment demanded. The crowd hushed as he stepped to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, waited a heartbeat, and spoke. "Yesterday, I was just a traveler trying to get home. Today, I stand before you as the CEO of Brooks Aviation. But titles don't change what happened. They don't change the look on a stranger's face when she decided I didn't belong. They don't change how the people around her stayed silent." A ripple moved through the crowd, uneasy recognition. "This isn't about me," he continued. "It's about how often we all stand in those same gates, silent witnesses to someone's dignity being tested." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. What happened at Gate 19 could have ended in anger, or humiliation, or violence. But it didn't. It ended with awareness. Now it must continue with accountability. Reporters raised cameras. Some employees nodded quietly, already knowing what was coming. "As of today," Elijah said, "Brooks Aviation and all our partner airlines will adopt a new set of policies we call the Dignity Protocols. Every gate agent, every flight attendant, every executive, including me, will undergo live bias response training. Every discriminatory complaint will be logged in a transparent database reviewed quarterly by a civilian oversight committee." A murmur spread. This was bigger than a press release. It was structural reform, open, measurable, and irreversible. He continued, voice steady. We'll also invest $10 million into community initiatives that promote equitable hiring, education, and representation across the aviation industry. Because this isn't about making headlines. It's about making habits. Rachel Nguyen, standing near the front, felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She had seen his composure at 30,000 feet. Now she was witnessing his courage on the ground. Elijah's tone softened. I've been asked if I forgive the people involved. The answer is simple. I do. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let hate write the last line. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but sincere, spreading like a slow wave through the plaza. Cameras flashed again, but Elijah didn't flinch. He finished with the same quiet conviction that had carried him through every moment since that morning at JFK. I hope one day, he said, that a man or woman walking into a first-class line will be seen for their humanity first. Until then, we have work to do. He stepped back from the podium. The applause grew louder. Somewhere in the crowd, a handmade sign lifted into the air. It read, "Dignity is not negotiable." Later that afternoon, in a conference room filled with the hum of screens and the scent of coffee, Elijah met with his leadership team. Daniel Hayes, Leah Kim, and several department heads joined via video call. The atmosphere was focused but charged with something new purpose. Leah began. We've had over 200 major companies reach out since the conference. They want to model our protocols for their own industries. Elijah nodded. That's good. Let's make it open source. No patents, no paywalls. The goal isn't ownership, it's change. Daniel looked up from his laptop. You realize, Elijah, you've started something far beyond aviation. Congress is already calling for hearings on bias prevention standards. Elijah gave a small, tired smile. Then, let's make sure we show them what leadership looks like. He turned to the large screen behind him, where live metrics glowed. Customer satisfaction rates were rising. Discrimination reports had dropped sharply overnight, but he didn't linger on the numbers. Data tells part of the story. He said, behavior tells the rest. Leah, how's the training rollout going? She pulled up another chart. 94% completion in the first 24 hours. And she hesitated, then smiled. Even the unions are supporting it. They said it's the first time they've seen a CEO lead change from the top without forcing it from the bottom. Elijah leaned back. Because respect isn't compliance. It's culture. Daniel closed his laptop. You know, not every CEO could have handled this the way you did. Elijah's eyes softened. It's not about handling it. It's about healing it. The room fell silent. Those words lingered in the air long after the meeting ended. Across the city. Madeline Carter sat in a small conference room at an HR training facility. The sterile white walls and humming air conditioner made the space feel smaller than it was. A facilitator handed her a workbook titled Unconscious Bias and the Modern Workplace. She looked down at the pages, her pen heavy in her hand. Around her, a dozen other employees sat quietly, some taking notes, some staring at the floor. The facilitator spoke gently. This isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. We all carry assumptions. The question is what we do once we see them. Madeline exhaled slowly, her throat tight. She wrote down the first words that came to her mind. I didn't see him. I saw what I feared. For the first time. She didn't fight the memory. She let it replay the tone of her own voice, the way people had looked at her, the moment Elijah's calm had reflected her chaos. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept writing. He didn't humiliate me. He showed me myself. Hours later, when the session ended, she walked outside into the open air. The sun felt different this time, less like exposure, more like cleansing. She took out her phone, opened the social media app she'd avoided for days, and typed a short message to anyone who's ever judged someone by their skin, their clothes, or their calm. Don't wait until you go viral to learn humility. I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life unlearning what blinded me. She hit post. Within minutes, the comments flooded in, some harsh, some forgiving, many grateful. And among them, one reply stood out, from Elijah Brooks himself. Accountability accepted. Growth begins. She stared at the screen for a long time before whispering, "Thank you." By week's end, the Gate 19 incident had become a national touchstone. News networks debated its implications, universities taught it in ethics classes, and lawmakers drafted preliminary language for corporate bias reform. But in the noise of progress, the human story still pulsed at the center, the man who chose integrity over outrage, and the woman who faced the mirror long enough to change. Nia Torres, the young live streamer, uploaded a new video from her dorm room. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed her growing audience. "I didn't mean to go viral," she said. "I just pressed record because something felt wrong. But now, I realize filming isn't enough. We have to act. We have to speak. Dignity doesn't protect itself." Her followers flooded the comments with messages of solidarity. Many had stories of their own moments they'd witnessed injustice, but stayed silent. The movement had found its voice, and it was young, diverse, and determined. Elijah watched Nia's video later that night from his office. He smiled as her words filled the room, her courage echoing the lesson he'd learned decades ago. Change doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts when ordinary people decide enough is enough. He closed the laptop, the city skyline glowing beyond the window. Somewhere out there. Madeline was starting over. Rachel was preparing to speak at a company training seminar. Nia was becoming a voice for a generation. And for the first time in a long while, Elijah felt something deeper than just his hope. A week after the press conference, the morning sun rose over the tarmac of JFK International. Planes gleamed in the light like silver birds preparing for flight. Gate 19. Once an ordinary boarding point was no longer just a number. It had become a symbol. Travelers stopped to take pictures beside a new plaque installed on the wall, its inscription simple yet profound. Here, dignity was tested. Here, humanity prevailed. Elijah Brooks stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. He had flown in from San Francisco that morning, not for business, but for something deeper. The airport looked almost the same as it had that morning of the confrontation: bright lights, rolling luggage, the faint smell of coffee and jet fuel. But the energy was different, softer, more awake. A group of reporters had gathered nearby, but this time they didn't rush toward him. They waited, respectfully silent, as if they understood that this moment wasn't about questions. It was about witnessing. Beside Elijah stood Rachel Nguyen, who had flown in to join him for the dedication ceremony. Her eyes shimmered as she looked at the plaque. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how one terrible moment can lead to something beautiful." Elijah nodded. "That's how storms work. They clear the air." Passengers walked by, glancing at him in recognition, but no one intruded. The story had evolved beyond scandal. It had become a shared lesson. For once, people seemed to understand that the real headline wasn't about humiliation or heroism. It was about what happens when empathy takes root. Lauren Price, the gate agent who had first hesitated that day, approached from the check-in desk. Her uniform was crisp, her posture straight, but her expression was tender. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, I wanted to thank you for what you said and for what you didn't. He smiled. What I didn't? She nodded. You could have ruined me. Instead, you made me want to be better. Elijah studied her face for a moment, then said, That's all I wanted. Lauren, growth beats punishment every time. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes, then stepped aside to make room for others arriving to witness the ceremony. Among them was a small group of employees holding signs that read, Dignity first, and the sky belongs to everyone. Elijah looked at those words and felt something inside him settle. As the event began, a representative from the airline stepped forward to speak, her voice steady but emotional. Gate 19 will now serve as a training site for our new dignity protocols. Every employee past, present, and future will begin their journey here, because this gate taught us that respect is where every flight should begin. Applause filled the terminal. Elijah stepped to the microphone once more, not as a CEO, but as a man whose life had collided with history. I never wanted fame, he began. But if it helps us fly fairer, I'll take it, because justice isn't about punishment, it's about purpose. He paused, eyes scanning the faces before him, employees, travelers, children holding their parents' hands. Every day, millions of people cross paths in places like this. Most moments pass quietly. Some become reminders that the smallest gestures, an assumption, a silence, a glance can change everything. We can't control every bias, but we can control what we do when we see it. A hush fell over the crowd. He continued softly. We named this initiative the Dignity Protocols, but maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just remembering that every person we meet carries a story we can't see. And maybe if we start there, we'll all land somewhere better. Applause rose again, gentle, sustained, the kind that feels like gratitude rather than praise. After the ceremony ended, Elijah stepped aside, allowing others to take pictures and share their reflections. Rachel lingered beside him. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just stayed quiet that day? She asked. Elijah smiled faintly. All the time, and every time I do. I remember that silence protects comfort, not progress. She nodded thoughtfully. You know, the girl who filmed the whole thing, Nia Torres, she's here. His eyes brightened. Really, Rachel pointed across the terminal. Nia stood near the window, phone in hand, live streaming again, this time with permission and purpose. The words, 1 week later, the gate that changed everything, scrolled across her screen. Elijah walked over. Nia's audience count was already in the thousands, viewers eager to see the man who had turned conflict into reform. When she saw him approach, she turned the camera toward him. Mr. Brooks, she said warmly, you changed the world in 7 days. How does that feel? He chuckled softly. I didn't change the world, Nia. I just reminded it what it should have already known. Her viewers flooded the chat with hearts and comments. She lowered the phone slightly, letting the moment breathe. Can I ask you one more question? Of course. What do you want people to remember when they watch that first video now? He thought for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the window where planes were taking off, silver streaks slicing the blue. That it's never about who's sitting in the seat. It's about who we are while we're standing in line. The crowd nearby grew silent, as if the words carried their own gravity. Nia ended the stream there, knowing some moments didn't need editing or background music, they just needed to exist. She smiled at him. You've given people hope, sir. Elijah shook his head gently. Hope was already there. It just needed a voice. As Nia walked away, Elijah turned back to the window. The same little girl from that morning, Lily Moore, was standing with her parents near the new plaque. She waved when she saw him. He crouched down so they were eye level. Hey there, Lily, he said softly. "How was your trip?" "It was fun. Grandpa took me fishing," she said proudly. "Mom told me what you did. You made people nicer." He laughed lightly. "Well, maybe I just reminded them how to be." She thought about that, then smiled. "You know what Grandpa says. He says the sky belongs to everyone." Elijah's throat tightened. "That's right," he said. "It does." Her mother smiled and nodded in agreement. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks, for showing my daughter what grace looks like." He looked at Lily again, her innocent eyes bright with belief. "No, ma'am. She showed it to me." As they walked away, Elijah stayed there a while longer, watching planes lift into the horizon. Each one carried strangers with their own dreams, their own fears, their own silent battles. And somewhere above the clouds, he imagined his father's voice steady, proud, and echoing through the wind. "You outflew it, son." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting that memory settle like the warmth of sunlight on skin. Then he whispered, "Yeah, Dad, we did." That evening, he returned to his hotel overlooking the city skyline. The lights shimmered across the Hudson like scattered stars. On his desk lay a small envelope addressed in neat handwriting. The front read simply, "From Madeline Carter." He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. "Mr. Brooks, there are no words big enough to undo what I said or did, but I wanted you to know I've started volunteering with a community initiative for bias education. I'm listening now. I'm learning. You gave me the dignity I didn't deserve, and I promise to pay it forward. Respectfully, Madeline." Elijah read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his briefcase, beside a worn photo of his father standing next to a plane engine decades ago. For the first time in many years, he felt something unfamiliar, not the tired patience of endurance, but the quiet peace of change, fulfilled. He looked out the window again. The city pulsed below like a living heart. Somewhere, people were still arguing, still misunderstanding, still learning. But maybe that was how progress worked, not through perfection, but through persistence. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone saw a man like him standing in line, they'd see more than what they feared. They'd see what they shared. The sky stretched wide beyond the glass open, endless, belonging to everyone. The story of white woman snatched black CEO's seat isn't just about an airport confrontation. It's a reflection of everyday life. How many times have we made assumptions about others based on appearance, clothes, or status? The truth is, dignity isn't defined by luxury or position. It's revealed by how we treat people when no one's watching. Elijah Brooks didn't answer hate with anger. He chose patience over pride. And in doing so, he turned humiliation into reform. His story reminds us that power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's found in stillness and knowing who you are, even when the world doubts it. For older audiences, this lesson is timeless respect, restraint, and wisdom are the quiet forces that shape justice. The story shows that true leadership doesn't just correct others, it heals systems, restores balance, and creates hope for the next generation. When life tests your dignity, remember Elijah's calm, because sometimes the loudest revolution begins in silence. Thank you for watching and feeling this story with us. If it moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of the kind of world you want to live in, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, like this video, and share it so more people can see that dignity still matters. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that touch the heart and remind us we're all human.